welcome everyone. It's good to see everybody, and it's an honor to be in your midst. I love youth workers and those who are serving the church. I always say that my passion really includes two things. It's young people and it's the church. And I want to see those two entities come together. And sometimes it's not easy for those two entities to come together. So my passion is that, my calling is that, and I get the privilege of working with an incredible team, as Rebecca mentioned, at Fuller Youth Institute, and doing research and creating resources and training that really can support leaders like you. That's for those of you that are not familiar with Fuller Youth Institute. We are part of Fuller Theological Seminary. Our primary office and primary campus is in Pasadena, California. I am coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina. It's the magic of technology that I get to work from all the way across the country with a team that's somewhat spread out around the different states. So it's great, and I love it. I also get to serve on a church staff, so I get to be on church staff here at Trinity Baptist Church, and I have this cool job of just coming and going as I need to, and connecting with young adults in the church, and helping them to find their place in the church, and then also teaching the rest of the congregation how to connect with the young adults that are coming. Notice I didn't say I lead a young adult ministry because that's not what I have time to do, or maybe even it's not what I think that needs to be done when it comes to young adults and helping them to journey in their faith. It's less about programming and more about connections, relational connections, and kind of bridge building for them. So I enjoy all the different hats that I get to wear. But today, I do want to share a little bit about some of our latest research, and that is on youth leader burnout and well-being. We launched this study really believing that healthy youth leaders are better able to overcome burnout and stay in ministry longer. And when leaders stay in ministry longer, we believe that young people are the beneficiaries of that, right? But there seems to be a gap in the research. Most studies really focus on senior pastors, with the exception of Youth Cartel that put out a report during the pandemic, in the midst of the pandemic. Few really looked at specifically around youth pastors and student ministry leaders, and how they were experiencing not only the pandemic, but also just how we're kind of emerging out of that. And we feel like that we're still somewhat emerging out of the pandemic in a lot of ways, especially in youth ministry. So in our study, we between January through August of 2024, this is from last calendar year, we surveyed over 1,100 church-based youth ministry leaders. And then, so with the survey, we had 1,100, and then we followed up with 70 of them with one-on-one interviews. And spent about 60 to 75 minutes with each of those leaders, digging deeper into the data with them, and asking them some great questions. So as you can see through with this graph, half of the youth leaders in our research are between the ages of 18 to 34. That probably doesn't surprise us in terms of younger leaders in youth ministry. Uh, I love the fact that another, third or at least 28% of them were in the age group of 35 to 44, which means that likely they've been in it for a while, and they've stayed in it. And then it makes my heart really swell when I see numbers like 14% and 7% and 2% of those that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s who are still in it for the young people. That really is encouraging for me. Um, uh, those that we surveyed, this is from our survey. These are numbers based on how many years of experience that they have, how many years of ministry that they have under their belt. And so you can see the majority of them, or a large percentage of them, are in the 2 to 5 and the 6 to 10 age range, or the number of years range. So again, that probably doesn't surprise most of us. Right. And of course, we at FYI try to make sure that it is a relevant study all the way across the country. So we've had leaders in all 50 states participate in our study, and you can see how they're broken down in the different regions of the country. Right. And then diversity also means diverse settings. And so 50% of our surveys came from suburban communities. About half serve churches averaging under 200 in weekly worship, which again should not surprise us, because most of our congregations across the country are under 200. And then 23% of our surveys came from those that attend churches that are 500 or more in attendance. Again, that correlates with having full-time youth ministry leaders in churches that can afford that, and oftentimes that's larger congregational settings. Of the ones that took our survey, you can see that it's 67, a majority of them are paid full-time. And of course, we know that that's happening less and less in our churches now. And so we're going to continue to see that number trend lower in the years to come. But 67 were paid full-time, and then the rest of them were either part-time, unpaid full-time, or unpaid part-time. And timeout, how does 13% of them are unpaid full-time? How does that happen? We need those in our ministries, don't we? I don't know about you, but I have not found a unpaid full-time volunteer leader to help in youth ministry just yet. So one of the goals of this study for us was to really understand more about ministry longevity and how that impacts our youth leaders. And some of what we learned was what we anticipated, but other parts of it was surprising to us. These figures were actually higher than we anticipated, based on what we tend to hear about youth pastors really moving on after a few years, or who move up. I will put those in quotes, because to me it is actually being demoted, moving from youth ministry into maybe a senior pastor role or something like that. I got demoted for a few years in my career, and I took it as a demotion in a lot of ways, because I loved being with young people. But especially given the current state of youth ministry, where there's really less emphasis on youth ministry in churches in general, right? And especially as a long-term calling, or a career that's sustainable over the years. So this is somewhat surprising to us. And then we dug into this question in our interviews a lot more. So these factors are based on what we heard in our interviews, and coding some of the answers that we heard in our interviews, that have considered leaving their jobs in the past year. And the top two reasons, job responsibility, adding on and adding on, and we know how that goes, that sometimes it just keeps, uh, because you do certain things well, people keep asking you to do more and more of those things. And then the second issue was issues with church leadership, relational connections, and having difficulties with other staff members, and including their boss. And then, of course, there are some other contributing factors, but the top two were relatively interesting to us, right? Um, And this was surprising also. While we suspected that many youth leaders also hold other responsibilities, we really didn't think it was going to be this high of percentages. So 29% of them were also young adult ministry leaders. 26% of them kind of oversaw all of family ministry or next gen ministry. And then 21% also held the children's ministry responsibilities in addition to their youth ministry responsibilities. Right. One of the leaders said to us, I love my ministry. I don't like my job. And isn't there a difference in that, right? I mean, we see that difference, we feel that difference. This leader really feels called to work with young people and sees the fruit of their ministry, but the job itself wasn't exactly what she had imagined in thinking about going into youth ministry. So specifically in ministry burnout, let's dive into that a little bit more. We asked about burnout a number of different ways in the survey and in our interviews. Our working definition of burnout, for the sake of this project, was fairly simple. So we didn't get into all the different nuances of this. But our simple definition of burnout was a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. Physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. All right. So when we looked at this, the top contributors to ministry burnout, we were not surprised to see workload at the top of this list, just having a lot of things to do. And from our other research, we suspected that it would be one of the higher ranking ones. We know that that lack of perceived impact can also be a contributor to burnout. And so we saw that in this survey also. We thought that the compensation would actually be a little bit higher than it was. Because we knew that youth ministry leaders were not being compensated super well in most cases. What we were surprised about was the second one, right? Is the lack of appreciation and recognition. We were really surprised about this one. As one of our colleagues noted that this is so easy to fix, right? A church may not be able to meaningfully reduce the workload because they just don't have enough people to do it all, or they don't have the resources to pay more, and we really can't force ministry impact. But appreciation and recognition is something that we can do that doesn't cost us much at all, if anything, right? Like being more intentional about how we recognize people's work and giving and really holding them up and saying thank you. That doesn't cost us anything. It's just being really intentional. And that's the second that ranked second in our contributors to ministry burnout. And that's something I think we can all fix pretty easily with a little bit of intentionality. The report also describes these burnout profiles in much more detail, but what we wanted to highlight here is that December through February are the highest burnout months overall. But there are specific profiles of leaders who are more likely to experience burnout in the summer or in the fall or winter. And we'll talk a little bit more about this shortly, and you can find out more in our report. If you haven't looked at the report, I'll drop that into our chat pretty soon. But these leaders report high levels of burnout. Who we worried about were the ones in the hyper burnout category, the 6% there, right? And these were the leaders who reported high levels of burnout every month of the year. Interestingly enough, they top out in April, so we're just a few weeks out from April. They top out in April, July, and December. Those are the three. Interestingly, those are the three top months. I would say is typically because Lenten season and leading up to Easter, which typically is in April, is busy and with lots of responsibilities. Of course, in youth ministry, the summer is just nutty with our schedules. And then December, Advent and Christmas season. So those are the 3 months in which they topped out the most. 80% of this group are in full-time paid positions, and 40% of them have served between 6 to 10 years. And we'll say a little bit more about that specifically around the 6 to 10 years. While more suburban leaders fall into this, and every category numerically, hyper burnout was the highest reported experience for both small town and rural leaders. So if you're in a small town serving in a congregation, or in a rural setting where there's not much around, that also is contributing to some of this hyper burnout. All right. One leader would say, I don't feel seen as a person. I just feel seen as a youth pastor. This hurts my heart, I think, and it should hurt all of us. But I imagine that we've all experienced this also in ministry, right? They see us as a person who is in a role, but they don't necessarily see us as a person. So we were intrigued by the relationship between tenure and burnout. And this slide tells us a little bit about that. The 6 to 10 year age, the 6 to 10 year range, as I mentioned before, seems to be the most critical window for support and intervention that we need to pay attention to. You can see it's interesting enough that those that have been in it for a long time, the 21 years or longer, seemingly have kind of quote unquote unlocked some of the wonderings of youth ministry, right? And they've been in it long enough. They have some healthier rhythms maybe in their lives. But those that are between the 6 to 10 years in ministry are the ones that are experiencing hyper burnout. I'm guessing, this is totally anecdotal guessing, but I'm really guessing that it's because that if they've been at a place for 6 years, that they're recognizing, oh, maybe some of the things that we have been doing aren't really working all that well. And starting to fight against some of the systems that are set in many of the churches. and wanting to see a cultural shift in the church. And we know that, you know, changing the culture of a congregation is really hard work. And some of that could be some of that could potentially be mixed in with this idea of being experiencing burnout. Perhaps related to the ministry tenure pattern here, leaders between the ages of 25 and 34 report the highest levels of burnout. And the second highest group is the 35 to 44 age group. So again, they've been in it for a while and have some experience, but maybe are seeing that there's need for change, and change is hard in any setting, especially in the church. So, and we also explored a little bit further with interviews who really reported low burnout. And we wanted to dig a little deeper into that, because we were like, well, okay, you don't seem to experience burnout. And why is that? And what we actually observed in our conversations with them, in our interviews with them, we observed that some of these youth ministry leaders have normalized burnout so much that it just was the regular way of life. And we think that it may be underreported in this case, right? That they're just so used to being tired all the time that they don't attribute that to burnout, but just the fact that they're always tired. And this theme really came up when we asked leaders about what keeps them going, like what keeps them going. And so one leader told us this: I think youth ministry, it takes pieces of you. I have never taken a summer vacation, you know, those kinds of things that you just start to lose. And boy, I just felt really burdened for this leader who feel like that parts of their lives are they're sacrificing parts of their lives for the sake of the ministry. We all do that in some sense, right? But to see it in writing like this was pretty stark. So the question, so the question really is, how do we prevent some of these things from happening? What were some of the things that people were telling us in our research? Top practices to prevent and recover from burnout: spending time with family and friends, engaging in a hobby, and prayer. And interestingly enough, only less than a quarter of them actually said working less, right? And this makes sense to us. This makes sense that it really is about the power of relational connection. It's the relational connection that prevents and helps us to recover from burnout. So whether it's family and friends, whether it's hanging out with people that you enjoy hanging out with, to share a hobby together, whatever it may be, and obviously spending time with God, connecting with God in prayer, in personal life. Those are ways, they all point to relational connection, and we know that that's really important. Again, one of our interviewee said, what helps with burnout for me is having life-giving friendships. I think it's super important. I was in a really weird spot mentally at the start of last week, and I just texted someone and was like, hey, when can we hang out? And we had lunch, and it really changed the tone of my week. And I'm guessing that many of you have had similar experiences. So here's some things that we should consider if you're in youth ministry directly, if you're working with teenagers. Here's some things that we should consider. Is really prioritizing relationships, right? Our research suggests that loneliness and isolation might drive youth leaders out of ministry faster than the workload itself. So we need to be careful that we don't get isolated or we don't feel isolated. Again, those relational connections. Being seen and known in your church is really important. It's important to all of us, right? And having friendships is critical for feeling like you belong. So you can just, really focus on those relational connections. So, and honestly, this can be hard in churches, right? Making and keeping friends. It can be hard because we hang around people in the church a lot. And maybe it's really important for us to have friends outside of our church, right? And sharing some hobbies or interests with them that has nothing to do with church. And again, investing in those relationships is really important for health, right? If you are not specifically in youth ministry or working with young people, but you have other roles in the church, maybe you're the senior pastor, maybe you work in a denomination, and you have some influence in what happens. So here's some recommendations for those that have those opportunities. You may already have some of these practices in place, or may have other ideas that you have to really provide the scaffolding for your youth leaders and support them. But here are some of our suggestions. So look for ways to appreciate and recognize. We talked about this earlier, right? We need to look for ways that we can really recognize the work of our and the impact of their work in youth ministry. We need to be really thinking about these high burnout seasons, right? Advent and Christmas, Lent and Easter, summer. Those are times in which burnout is higher. And so maybe we can provide some additional support. Maybe it's a, hey, you've been really working hard. Why don't you take a day or two off in addition to your normal day away from the office? Right, something like that, or just checking in more often. Maybe maybe it's just a text or popping your head into their office when they're in and just saying, hey, how you doing? And just checking in a little bit more. Obviously, providing training for younger leaders. Training that will give them the tools that they need to do ministry well, but also those in that 6 to 10 year range, right? They've been in it for a while. They have a lot of the tools, but maybe they just need the relational connection and the relational support to keep going and to feel like they're making a difference. Maybe what we can do as leaders is protect them, protect their time, protect them from saying yes to too many things, and not overloading them. And then when we're in business meetings, or when we're in personnel meetings or finance meetings, that we can advocate for our youth leader so that they will experience health and longevity in that. Right. And you may have some other ways in which you do this already, but yeah, we'd love to, for you to go to this link, fulleryouthinstitute.org/burnout. You can download the report from there and find out a lot more detail. I did not share all that we have in that report. And we'd love for you to take a look at that. So yeah, let's let's have some conversations around what you heard and what stood out to you. I see a couple of questions in chat. Caitlin, that's a great question about 6 to 10 years in a single role or in ministry altogether. Our data was around 6 to 10 years of ministry altogether. And so not necessarily in that particular church for that length of time, right? And then were networking and exercise not listed as ways of managing burnout? Yeah, it was. It just wasn't as high as some of the others, right? Uh, we know that again, isolation is a big part of burnout. So networking and having a network of leaders that you're connected to, really important. Like having a peer learning group, really important. Uh, uh, and also physically, that getting outside or working out, that does help mental health. That does help physical health. But again, it's more than just that also when it comes to burnout. So those are helpful factors or helpful solves for that, but it didn't rank as high as some of the others. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, for chatting that in. Yeah, any other kind of um, things that stood out to you? What resonated, what did not resonate, or what questions do you have? Uh, would love to have a conversation together.
Yeah, you're welcome to unmute. And um, I personally found it fascinating that I was thinking back to my biggest season of burnout, and it was at 8 years. And I was like, that is spot on with what other people are reporting. So it's interesting to look at the correlations in our own stories and times that we've felt similarly.
Yeah, isn't it where I don't know how scientific this is, but it's like I've always heard that, we need to kind of reinvent, quote unquote, reinvent ourselves every 7 years in ministry, because things change so quickly and that we can't just keep doing the same things over and over again. So yeah, that makes sense. Randy, you unmuted.
Yeah, did you find anything about, I got two questions. The first one is, are churches allowing sabbaticals,
Mm.
which can be helpful? It's about 7 years in typically. And the second question is, I'm curious, I ran across some research recently from this other ministry positions like senior pastors, associate pastors, that seems similar. And I'm just curious if you found any similarities between those two roles and youth ministry.
Yeah, we didn't do a specific kind of comparative data study between the senior leaders and youth leaders. But yeah, I mean, it would not be surprising to any of us to see similar data, right? Ministry is ministry, no matter what age group we're working with, right? And maybe, I'm going to give senior leaders the benefit of the doubt here in a lot of ways, is that um, maybe because we don't, senior leaders often don't get recognition either, that we don't think about giving recognition to others, right? And should it be that way? Absolutely not. Could it be one of the factors that's leading to that? Absolutely. So yeah, it's just being more intentional about that. And as far as sabbatical goes, uh, too many churches do not have a sabbatical policy for ministers in general, but if they do, they likely have one for their senior minister, but maybe not their not the other uh, uh, positions in the church. And then it has a lot to do with, I think it has a lot to do with depending on the denomination uh, and and the ways in which that happens with ordination recognition, and sometimes ordination allows for that to happen a little bit easier than if you're a director of youth ministry and not considered clergy in a lot of ways. And that can be a barrier sometimes. So
And Dorothy in the chat said, how would an appropriate how would recognizing someone look like for you? Is it recognizing them during worship and announcing it, or organizing a dinner? Did any ideas or things that resonated with participants come through in the study?
I think it was interesting in our study. A lot of them talked about just verbal recognition, right? A lot of them talked about, hey, I remember when I got praised for by parents. So this wasn't even from like leadership, but from parents of how much they appreciated them for X, Y, and Z, whatever that might be. From a senior leadership position perspective, it's, yeah, I mean, it could be easily one of those things that can be done in a worship service, especially, let's say, in the summer, coming back from a mission trip. Many times, youth groups will share their mission experience with the church on a Sunday morning or a Sunday night. And it's taking that time to really say thank you to the youth leader who made all that, who made the work happen, right? And recognizing them in that way. A gift card would always, no one's going to turn that away, but that's not even necessary, right? It's not the thing. You all probably do this also, but we also heard in our research of just the notes that they receive from either parents or from young people themselves, and how they keep those notes, right? You keep them in your drawer or in the box somewhere, and you pull those out every once in a while because you're having a bad day or you're having a tough season in ministry, and those keep you going, reminding you why you do what you do. Yeah, those are simple ways. And then more elaborate things in maybe the 5-year mark or the 10-year mark, to celebrate some anniversaries when it comes to that, is also great in church settings.
Yeah. A phrase we say a lot is something is better than nothing. And I feel like, especially in this conversation, we can overcomplicate it or make it a bigger thing when really it's saying the nice thing that you just thought. It's speaking that out loud and being more intentional with your words and actions to encourage someone. So I think the big things are great, but don't let that stop you from doing the little things that you can do in the moment.
Oh, that's such a good word, Rebecca. That is a really good word. And then social media is another place, right? If you have, if your church utilizes social media, if you have a Facebook group or things like that, that really is an easy, again, recognition that you can give in those spaces. So, yeah, what else stood out to you?
I always struggle with the protecting my yes. I'm in a very high capacity ministry setting where we're very fast paced all the time. And sometimes protecting my yes looks like I'm not in alignment with our mission as a church, or that's my fear with senior leadership. So do you have any experience with that on how to navigate that, or how to convince senior leaders that protecting the yes is important for long term?
Yeah, Caitlin, I resonate with your ministry setting for sure. I've served in a lot of fast-paced places, and I've struggled with saying too many yeses also. And yeah, I mean, you can come up if you say no at times, it can come across as not being a team player or not being, not pulling your own weight or all of that. And really that comes down to communication. It just comes down to communication, and is really sitting down with whoever your mentors or supervisors may be, and saying, hey, I really would like to help out with this, but I'm focused over here. We got all these things going on. And so the question or the conversation could be around, hey, if I take this on, can you help me figure out what I can drop? So that we can put more energy on this over here. So if that's where the church needs that energy, then that's fine. But it's the conversation of, we don't hardly ever drop anything, and so it's inviting them into that conversation and brainstorming ways to say, hey, what can we not do as much of, or what can we put a pause on for a little while we focus over here. So that's the kind of the conversation I would be having.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Another one of our great hopes is that you can take this report and say, hey, senior pastor or whoever your supervisor is, can we schedule a 30-minute conversation on this report, and let's talk about kind of what resonated with you and what resonated with me, and maybe talk a little bit about how we can prevent burnout in both directions, right? And so we hope that it could be a conversation starter for you and your supervisor or board, or whoever it may be that are the decision makers.
Great. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, we're so thankful for this conversation, and we're thankful for all the work you do to put data behind the things that resonate with us, but to have it in front of us and packaged like this is so powerful. You're all going to receive this recording. It's going to be available for anyone who needs it, because like we said, we want this to be a conversation starter, and we want the needle to move on youth pastor wellness, because the work you do is so important, and we want you still sitting in your roles down the road because of interventions now, to make sure that you're able to lead from a healthy space. So you'll receive that recording, pass it along to whoever could benefit from it. I always say the cashier at the grocery store, if it makes a difference in your ministry, feel free, whatever needs to get done so that kids and teens know the love of Jesus more. That's what we're about. So Andy, thank you so much for your time and for all of the work that you do. We appreciate it so much. We'll be back here in a couple weeks with Lisette Frazier, who's also on the FYI team with 10 by 10, talking about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And so I hope you can join us for that conversation, as well as we figure out how to best communicate the love of Jesus to these generations coming up. So thanks for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.